Future Flash by Helmetag Murdock. Chapter 1. My first memories of the cold. I was strapped into my car seat, but whatever car I'd arrived in had long since taken off. I don't remember the car or who was in it, just the car seat, rocking back and forth on the stoop. The sky was dark, the road empty, and the concrete front stoop was cracked and icy. I was barely a year old, and alone in the world. Walt doesn't know that I can remember that far back, but I do remember. I remember the scratchy pink blanket, and how it hadn't kept me warm even before I kicked it off and out of reach. And I remember Walt, only I didn't know his name yet. Walking up the sidewalk and standing in front of me, his breath making puffy white clouds in the air. "What on earth?" he asked. He looked around but saw that same empty road I'd seen. He stared at me for a minute, shaking his head. Then he picked up a yellow envelope from the stoop and tore it open with his thumb. He pulled out a matching yellow sheet of paper, and his face crumpled as he read it. He sank down next to me, facing the road. He held his head in his hands, and I could hear him each time he exhaled, blowing out the cold night air with force as if to rid it from his body. When he finally stood, his eyes were red, and he stuffed the envelope and paper in the pocket of his navy blue parka with shaky hands. He considered me for a while, adjusting his baseball cap a few times, as if maybe that would solve something. Then he took his parka off and placed it over me. As soon as his warm hand touched my arm, I closed my eyes and saw an image of the future flash before me. It was the first time I could remember that happening, which is probably why I remember the day on the stoop so well. There is a certain clarity to the present on the days when I see the future, the days when I have what I've come to call a future flash. It was a quick image, and though it would happen 11 years in the future, it was as clear as the stars above me. I saw Walt and me sitting at a kitchen table together, drinking coffee and hot chocolate and eating muffins. I knew right then that I didn't have to worry about being left out in the cold anymore, and I giggled with relief. Walt looked down at me and smiled. When I didn't stop, he started laughing too. Then he brought me into his green wooden house, the house I now call home. We've never talked about that night, or how I know that he found me on a stoop, and that he's not really my dad. I mention this today because this morning, Walt and I are eating some of Carmen's blueberry muffins and drinking coffee and hot chocolate at the kitchen table, and everything, down to the stain on the left sleeve of my black hoodie, to the crumb of muffin on Walt's chin, looks exactly as it had when I saw it all those years ago. That's how I know something important is going to happen. Whenever I experience one of my future flashes, it means I'm going to have an interesting day. Of course, at the moment, Walt is making the morning as boring as possible by drilling me on fraction problems at breakfast. "You know this one, Laney," he says, giving me an encouraging smile. But I've been thinking about car seats and cold nights and have no idea what he asked. "Don't worry, Walt. I studied this time," I reply, gulping down the end of my hot chocolate before slinging my backpack over my shoulder. I lean over to brush the muffin off his chin and kiss his scratchy cheek. "Just wish me luck." "You don't need luck, Laney. It's all up here," he replies, tousling my hair. I tug at a piece of my short ink-black hair. "Really? Math is in here?" "Get to school or you'll miss the test." Chapter 2. If I cut through the fields and farmland behind our house, the walk to school should take 15 minutes, but I always end up stopping at Tabitha's along the way. She has dozens of cats, all females, and they lounge on her back porch in the sun like ladies by a pool, only moving to roll over and stretch from time to time. On an early fall day like today, Tabitha's usually out there too, watering some of her plants, with at least one cat twirling around the mismatched socks on her feet. "Good morning, Lainey," she calls out, her purple glasses flashing in the sun. "Come sit and have some tea with me and the girls." Tabitha can't remember that I need to go to school, even though I tell her every time I stop by her house. I pause next to her porch to scratch a skinny grey and white striped cat with a crooked tail. "Is this one new?" I ask her. "Got her at the shelter yesterday," Tabitha says, brushing back a wisp of her long blue-grey hair. "One of these days they're going to cut me off. But you know, I just can't stand to think of them in those cages." The small cat licks the back of my hand and begins to make a rumbly motor sound. "What's her name?" "Why don't you name this one?" Tabitha offers, leaning down to water a row of potted herbs. "Really?" I scoop up the featherlight cat. She climbs up my shirt and onto my right shoulder. A print of my favourite Frida Kahlo painting hangs on the wall of my treehouse, the one where she looks stately with 2 parrots in her arms and 2 on her shoulders. "How about Frida?" I suggest. Tabitha looks up from her watering. "It's different." I like it. Frida nibbles at a piece of my hair. "Come sit for a while," Tabitha insists. I've got to get to school." I gently pull Frida off my shoulder and place her on the porch. She protests with a loud meow before joining the other cats. I imagine a different day ahead of me. One where I skip school and sit in the sun with Tabitha and her cats, sketching pictures of the cats in my notebook, while Tabitha drinks lavender tea and embroiders on the porch. Instead, I wave goodbye and continue on my way through the field to school, the right shoulder of my sweatshirt dusted in grey fur. It's not until I'm almost there that I remember Mrs. Whipple's announcement yesterday about getting a new kid in our class. This has never happened, as far as I can remember. Thornville is a sleepy town of just over 1,000 people, and Thornville K-12 is the town's only school. I've been in class with the same 7 boys and 4 girls since kindergarten. Nearly all of their parents work for the chicken factory, and it's the kind of job you take because you grew up in Thornville. No one moves here hoping for a better life. I drag my feet, even though I'm already at risk of arriving late. When I meet someone for the first time, I almost always have a future flash. This can be fun or unsettling, depending on what I see. I try to think optimistically. Maybe I'll see a future friend. Against the odds, I hope for a girl, one who loves art and who comes from somewhere exotic and far away from Colorado, somewhere like Los Angeles or New York City. I imagine seeing a future flash of us spending our afternoons together in my treehouse, painting and drawing. Of course, I'd have to take down all the pictures of my other future flashes. I wouldn't want to explain those to anyone, but I'd take them down for a friend. When I get to our classroom, the boys are beside themselves with excitement. They're hoping for another boy, of course. They talk even louder than usual and keep eyeing the door. Their dream of having an even number of boys for their football games at recess could finally come true. When the bell rings, everyone rushes to find a seat. One seat remains empty. "Where's the new kid?" Axel shouts, and just like that, the door opens. The new boy stands in the doorway with an apologetic smile. He's no football player. His scrawny body would be better suited to stand in for the goalpost. He's wearing a grey t-shirt with the periodic table of elements on the front, and bright orange hair sticks up all over his head. As if that wasn't enough to place him permanently on Axel's bully list, he's covered in freckles. I mean, covered. Like he was dipped in butter and then rolled in a bowl of freckles. For a moment, everyone is so fascinated with his freckles that they don't recognise that this is not what anyone was hoping for. Then he sneezes. Twice. And it's like someone let the air out of a balloon. The whole class deflates. "Oh, man!" Axel groans, putting his face down on the desk. Mrs. Whipple shoots him a dirty look. He bangs his head against the desk until she raps on it with her fingers and tells him, "Enough." "This is Lyle," Mrs. Whipple announces. To her credit, her toothy smile never wavers. "Hi, guys." He greets us with a little wave before walking over and sinking down in his seat. Mrs. Whipple doesn't bother with further introductions. Even she knows it would be painful for everyone involved. Instead, she says, "Welcome to 7th grade, Lyle." Then she faces the board and points to our schedule. "I'm sure you're all happy that you have PE first period today, so before you get too settled in, let's line up and head down to the gym." I glance at Lyle as I stand up. He's taking his time to push in his chair. I'm pretty sure he's not happy that we have PE first period, but he shouldn't worry too much. Once he meets Miss Fontaine, he'll realise that our gym class is not going to test his athleticism. Lyle catches me looking over at him, and I avert my eyes, pretending I meant only to check the clock above him. I feel bad for him. The new boy who knows he's already a disappointment to everyone. I dread seeing an image of his future, because it can't be good. Not that I'll be getting near him any time soon. The last thing I need to do is connect myself to the boy who's bound to be Axel's newest punching bag. Axel has already secured my position at the lowest rung on the social ladder by calling me Insane Elaine and Art Freak since kindergarten. I've learnt to fly under his radar, and befriending Lyle would not help. Miss Fontaine is waiting for us in the gym. Not your typical gym teacher, she weighs at least 300 pounds and hates sports. She manages to breathe heavily and sweat profusely even when just watching other people exert themselves. And she usually spends the whole gym class sitting on the side of the gym, fanning herself with her hand. The only exercise she approves of is dance. So, while I imagine other kids across the country learning to kick a soccer ball or shoot a basket in their gym classes, we have spent the last few years learning pliés and the box step, while the basketballs gather dust in a bin in a corner. "Today we will be learning to square dance," Miss Fontaine announces as we file into the gym. The entire class groans. "Find a partner," she instructs before slumping into a favourite metal chair. The chair creaks under her weight. There is a quick scramble, and of course, I am left facing Lyle, whose frown suggests he's as horrified as I am at the prospect of dancing together. I avoid eye contact by taking a sudden interest in what all the other students are doing. Most of them are standing in square dance position, holding their partner's hands, looking bored. Axel slouches against the wall, smirking. I bet he's appreciative of Lyle right now, since an uneven number of students means that he gets to sit this one out. Miss Fontaine reaches over and turns on the boombox. While the rest of the world has advanced to iPods and other digital music systems, Miss Fontaine uses the same giant boombox with the same cassette tapes that she's been using for the last 25 years. "Now, we're going to start with swings and then we'll move on to the do-si-do. Okay? Everyone face your partner and grab hands," she shouts over the music. Lyle puts his hand up. I hesitate. The music stops. "Elaine, grab your partner's hand," Miss Fontaine yells. She reaches back over to the boombox and the music fills the room again. I reluctantly put my hand back up. Lyle grabs it with his hand, which is surprisingly dry and warm. I close my eyes. What I see is worse than I ever could have imagined.